I guess, rare earth industry, not long ago I was asking you what the grade mean, what's a good grade, and how much intercept is a good intercept, and things like that. And I think that the understanding of this sector is still, as we said, very fluid, and jury is nowhere near coming back to the courthouse. Um, and that leads to my next question, which is really the crux of where I think the understanding's at now. We've gone from those things I mentioned, what does the grade mean, what does TREO, etc., etc. Now it's all about the lab, about the MET tests and things like that. And the market seems to be focusing on this rightly at this point in time, but there's this talk about ionic and clay, and a lot of people say, oh, look, ionic is best and clay is not so good, and etc. But I simplistically let's call them alluvial rare earths. And there seemed to be a difference in, there's no difference in physical attributes, as I've learned. It's all about going into the lab and about whether this thing comes out or not. Um, so, do you think the whole idea of a better style of deposit is flawed, um, and the conversation should be about the ability to leach and extract things out, and obviously reduction in chemicals, the balancing act and everything? Do you think that should be more the discussion than, ionic's best and not?
Yeah, no, I agree. So alluvial is probably not a bad term because what we've been is it's a granite that's been obviously eroded into clays, and most of the clays are very similar in their properties. So you'll see in terms of our Mag Rio, we've got 23%. You'll see that very similarly across most clays in the industry, and that's where the value drive comes from. So how are you going to get those four basic elements out? So NdPr, dysprosium and terbium out, and what's the economics behind that? In terms of ionic versus non-ionic and all those, we're all clays. What everyone's seeing, and I've seen it in multiple releases on the metallurgy now, is the rare earths are located in the fines fractions. So anything less than 75 micron, some people say 20 micron, but it's generally very, very fine. If you can put it into a leach tank, you can generally extract it with acid of some sort. Now, the ionic debate is interesting. I've only seen one true ionic resource that's probably come out, in my opinion anyway, in the last 12 to 18 months, and that's probably Meteoric in Brazil. They've had some good numbers in terms of their high grade. They've got a big resource. They're probably the best one I've seen, and we're probably the second best, is in our obviously opinion. But they've got a true ionic, and when I say true ionic is using a pH of 4 and ammonium sulfate. So ammonium sulfate's like a fertiliser. I can buy it on my farm. It costs $500 a tonne to buy on the farm landed. You stick it in there. You don't have to add too much acid. You take it down to pH of 4 and you can easily extract 50-60%. That's a true ionic ore body. What we're seeing in a lot of the clay-hosted ones, especially in Australia or overseas in Africa and a few others, is they're getting 10-15% recoveries on the ionic basis, so a pH of 4 and ammonium sulfate. So that's not going to work economically for anyone. That's Blind Freddy can see that. So then everyone looks and goes, well, I need to get around 50-60% recoveries. And I think, go back to the original interviews we had once upon a time, I always said 50 to 70% recoveries is going to be a good recovery for the industry. And to achieve that, you've got to add acid. So you're taking your pHs down to around a pH of 1 plus or minus a little bit. Why do you do that? That's when the acid can actually get into those ultrafine fraction of the rare earths and start extracting that into solution. They're not extracting everything. There's still a non-ionic portion, or I should say a refractory portion, that's never going to be recoverable because you've got to stick it in an oven, burn it, and you'll never get those recoveries. So on a pure basis of ionic versus non-ionic or whatever else, I think it's a flawed argument. And as you mentioned, it's what's the total cost to actually extract it. So hence why we've also chosen a higher cutoff grade. If you've got 800 ppm, you can't afford as much in terms of acid or reagents or mining costs or whatever else. But if you've suddenly got 60% to 100% higher grades, so 1300 to 1500 or 1600 parts per million, suddenly you can afford an acid. You can afford to suddenly extract, instead of 10, 20, 30% recoveries. You're now getting 50, 60, 70% recoveries. So you're getting a double whammy there. You're then getting an increase in revenue. You're almost doubling your revenue by being able to use the acids. Yes, the acids cost more. We've gone down the path of looking, do you use sulfuric acid? Do you use hydrochloric acid? Do you use ammonium sulfate? Do you use salt water? All these things. So we're looking at those. We came to the conclusion that hydrochloric acid is better because you'll get a higher recovery. You will also put more impurities into the solution that you'll have to remove at the end of the day. But when you look at how do you produce hydrochloric acid, you use this thing called a chloroalkali process. So a chloroalkali process is pretty simple. It's it takes salt, so pretty pure salt from, say, Northwest, Lake Deborah, all those places have got good quality salt, so it's virtually table salt. You then add water and you add power, and you can then produce a hydrochloric acid, but you also produce a sodium hydroxide base, which is an alkaline product. And why is that important for? You're not trucking water down all around the place, so you don't have to truck hydrochloric acid 32% in with a lot of water from Kwinana. You can do it on site. But at the end of the day, you need to neutralise that acid to precipitate out, even with a true ionic process at a pH of 4, you still need to precipitate out your mixed rare earth carbonate by increasing the pH back to something closer to neutral. So you still need that alkaline material, which is sodium hydroxide or lime. So we've looked at what the total cost is, and you don't want to be having all these trucks coming in from all these other processing facilities all around Western Australia. If we can just have one spot on our site that trucks in salt, we can then have our two main reagents that we'll use. We then use it to leach, but when we also use it to neutralise at the end of the day, the cost is really, really effective.